was behind your naming to the board of the newly rebranded Facets Film Forum? And given your background, why was it the right move for you to join the board at this time?
You know, I kind of I attribute my own sort of cinema coming of age to first discovering facets back in the late 70s. And it's not like I lived there or I spent all my time there, but it really opened my eyes to world cinema and independent cinema in a way that even film studies classes that I took in school didn't do, right? It felt there was something sort of edgy and subversive and cool about going to facets, whether it was to see a film or to rent.
Right,
Back in the day when facets was just killing it in terms of video rentals and sort of pioneered the whole mail order thing and well before Netflix. So there was something I liked about having an association with facets that I always liked. And then I got, through my years of working in both the Illinois and then of course at the Chicago Film Office, I got to know Milos and really had a great admiration for who he was and loved his cantankerous manner and his opinions and his candor, but I really loved his passion for films and
naturally.
specifically films that were not part of the regular Hollywood schedule. So I had a great affinity for facets, and when I was then, years after, or not years, a couple of years after I left the Chicago Film Office, I'd been doing some consulting and I had been dabbling and doing some producing, but I still had sort of like an open canvas in terms of what I'd want to do. And my longtime friend and fellow film commissioner colleague Randy Adamsick, who had been with Facets in many capacities for years, suggested joining the board. And I thought, wow, that feels like a great fit. And
Hmm.
um, and the more I spent time with the other board members and got to sort of spend a lot more time with facets, it just felt like I love this. And so the more time I spent with facets, the more it felt like, hey, I really want to help this organization, particularly at a pivotal time where it's celebrating its 50th year, not a small feat for any
Right,
non-for-profit, small
right.
non-for-profit. So it just felt great. It just felt like a really solid fit.
What plans have you been involved with so far, and why are you excited about what is ahead for Facets?
I really, given all of the years that I spent working either in production itself as a location manager or in servicing productions that were filmed in Chicago or filmed in Illinois, I felt like, and this was something that the board and the staff were very interested in letting Facets be more of a gathering place or a hub or a place of celebration for films and the filmmakers of Chicago. And whether that was directors or whether that was crew or whether that was just fans of films that celebrate Chicago, I think bringing that experience um, and connections and network to facets was something that I could bring, those decades of having spent as, all those years more or less either in the trenches or in the office servicing the trenches. That was something I felt like I could bring that was something that facets didn't necessarily have in part of their board membership and representation. So that is something that the Chicago on Screen series addresses, which is
Yeah,
taking a look at some of the most celebrated films that have been shot in Chicago, but then having conversations with the filmmakers and the crew about how they went about doing
nice.
it, what were their motivations, how did they get involved in the film industry, all of that backstory, which I think everybody really kind of appreciates beyond just the fact that something like The Dark Knight or The Fugitive
Right,
may have been great representations of filmmaking in Chicago. How they flipped a truck end over end, or how they wrecked a
right.
train in the middle of North Carolina is of interest to a whole lot of people, and that's
Sure.
something I think that series can can hopefully tap into.
Well, I wanted to talk a little about that series. What are other examples that best highlight the city as far as film is concerned? And which film do you think highlights what Chicago is about without necessarily showing the Bean or Wrigley Field or,
Sure.
the obvious? Hmm.
But a film that has always sort of struck me as both visually stunning and sophisticated in its craft, uh, and also not necessarily going for the iconic landmarks to establish Chicago,
Right.
is Michael Mann's film Thief, which
Ah,
was shot in
yeah, very good.
Chicago. I want to say 79,
Yeah,
78, maybe it was 80. It was early,
it
right?
was very early, yes.
Yeah. It was early in our history as a place where Hollywood movies were being shot.
Correct.
And the look of that film and the performances in that film, but specifically this sort of the grit. I mean, I grew up just off of Cicero Avenue in Chicago, and Cicero Avenue was like one used car lot after the next. And the depiction of the used car lot that
Yeah,
I can't remember James Caan's character's name in the film
right, right,
necessarily, but that sort of that that string of bare light bulbs, the cars freshly washed and the gleam off of that.
right.
There was something I and the wet alleys with the fire escapes. There's a real texture and sophistication to what was sort of everyday Chicago to me that I
Right,
really loved. It wasn't like, hey, we're gonna go downtown and get the skyline. It's like
right.
we're gonna go in this alley because they've got a great selection of fire escapes.
What was the first moment in your life that film became something beyond entertainment for you to pursue as a career? A kid from Cicero Avenue.
Yeah, from Frisco Avenue. So, I'd studied film in school,
Okay,
and I got I was lucky enough at the and I knew that, and this was in the late 70s, early 80s,
right.
and word on the street in Chicago was that the Blues Brothers was being made.
Okay.
Uh, and it was a spectacle, and there was chases, and there was all these wrecked cars, and there was mayhem down in the Loop, and there was Lower
Jeez.
Wacker Drive, and
Right.
it's sort of lit in my mind the notion that they're making movies here. But I was fortunate enough to get an internship at the Illinois Film Office that opened my eyes to location scouting. But even then, I still felt like, for me to really work at this is gonna be difficult because it seemed like winning the lottery to work on a movie.
Sure.
But I will say I went to visit a friend in New York about that time, and we went out to see, and I can't remember the theater that we went to see it in, but it went to see Blood Simple. And it was just released, and there was a big review of it in the Village Voice, and it's like, hey, check this out. This sounds pretty interesting. And he was a good friend of mine. He had gone to Columbia College. He studied film, and we were both like film fans. And
Sure.
seeing that film made me feel like, wow,
Wow.
if I were to make a film, it would be like that, right? It really impressed me. And I think that changed my it changed a lot in the way that I viewed film and something that I really wanted, I aspire to. And it kind of drove my interest in then saying, I'm going to work on films. I'm going to get a job. And I did. I got a job location scouting for a Dan Aykroyd movie called Dr. Detroit, which wasn't which
Okay.
wasn't necessarily a huge hit, but for me, it was like, hey
It's a
man,
known film. It's a known
and
film.
and the notion of location scouting really was something I felt like I could do without having, I wasn't like, I didn't know how to be a grip necessarily or how to
Right.
be a gaffer, but I could take pictures because I was working as an assistant to a photographer at Sportsman's Park Racetrack. So I had some photography
There you
skills.
go.
And scouting locations and the whole notion of locations as being important was something that kind of resonated with me, like those used car lots, right? On Cicero Avenue, there's a beauty in the everyday that
Yeah.
locations could serve, and I stuck to it, and worked my way into it, and had fun with it.
In dealing with Chicago politics and city commerce, what is distinctive about running the Chicago film office versus other cities' film offices that you've observed?
Well, I can't speak specifically to how others, well, I can to some extent. Yeah,
Yeah,
I can say that other film offices in other cities sometimes were extensions of offices of tourism, and this is probably true of state film offices as well.
sure.
They weren't as rooted in operations as I felt the Chicago Film Office in my day was, right? We had close ties to the mayor's office. We had close ties to what was then the mayor's office of special events. And then in this second half of the time that I was there, we were part of the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. So we had great connections and relationships with the other city departments that had to come together to make things possible.
Interesting. Okay.
And I'm talking police department, Department of Transportation, streets and sanitation, the mayor's office itself,
Right.
um, great relationships with city council, because it was obvious that to pull off big things and small things, you really needed full city support in order to accomplish that. And maintaining
Certainly.
those relationships and um, on behalf of the mayor, sending the message throughout the city that this is good for us, both in economic development, it's good for our cultural identity, it's good, it serves our interests in tourism, it serves our interests in generating small business, vendors that were popping up, sound stages that were getting built. It just seemed like this is an industry that touches a lot of other industries. And not surprisingly, this is an office that needs to network with the city's other departments very intimately and hand in hand. So with the film office, obviously not doing all of the work of those departments, but
Right.
coordinating the
Coordinating.
work of all those other departments to make it seamless for the filmmaker and for the production so that they weren't just told, oh, go talk to these guys or go talk to those guys. We shepherded that process. That in itself was an incentive. I'll tell you what was most interesting for me. It was that the polarization, not the polarization, but here you got the film industry on one side, which has got its own sort of bureaucracy
Yeah.
and complications and ego and power. And then you've got city government on the other
Yeah.
side, which is equally as powerful and bureaucratic, and finding a way for those two worlds to work together that for was always a challenge. It was
Yeah.
something that I probably couldn't get enough of because I liked being able to marry those two worlds because they had nothing to do with each other, right? They really truly had nothing to do with each other.
Finally, as a newly minted board member and as Facets of now Facets Film Forum celebrates its 50th anniversary, what would you say to someone who hasn't been to Facets on how to enjoy what they do?
Facets has a, a great strength in being able to both curate and offer a context about the films that they program and the films that they make available. It's not just about going to see a movie there. It's about the conversations that are created around that movie, whether it's addressing a certain issue or appreciating a certain genre or tapping into an interest. And I'm thinking very specifically about a series that the fastest programs now that's um, our anime series. And it's films that you won't necessarily find anywhere else.
Right.
And I think Facets has always had the great ability to sort of pluck from the shadows films and content that deserve our attention and aren't always accessible. And Fastest has a way of presenting that. And that is unique, right? That's something that as film goers, whether you're a cinephile or just a fan or looking to be entertained, or if you're very passionate about a particular issue, facets. And this stems from Milos Dalic and his vision when he created this place out of a church back in 1975. He was trying to draw attention to something that he felt was worth paying attention to.
Oh,
And it caught people's imagination and it caught their interest. And I think that vision has sort of stayed with Facets for 50 years now. And I feel a strong responsibility, along with my co-chair, Tamara Bajorquez, as well as the rest of the board, to continue that vision because that's important, right? And Facets doesn't serve the community in the way that it used to because Facets predated certainly streaming. It predated the ability to rent movies whenever you wanted to.
right, right.
And now it's finding a way to reach audiences where all of that availability perhaps isn't as strong, right? It taps into the communal aspect of things, and people are starved to get back to seeing things in person with a community. And that's where Facets, I think, really, really offers somebody the opportunity to see something and reflect upon it in a community where shared ideas and shared perspectives, bridge a lot of gaps. And Lord knows we got a lot of gaps these days.
This is Patrick McDonald for HollywoodChicago.com. Copyright 2025.